Hey everyone, this is Carter, and welcome to this edition of Making It Up, the conversation series where I sit down with writers of all backgrounds and chit chat for about 45 minutes. And of course, at the end, we always do a fun little storytelling where we just completely improv a short story based on a random sentence from a random book. Before we get to today's guest, just want to mention that my company, Unbound Writer, is now taking reservations for my October writing retreat in Boulder, Colorado. I cannot wait for this. We call it Unbound Immersion, 2.5 days of coaching, time to write, and really just a lot of inspiration and figuring out what your blocks are. And it's interesting because today I spoke to somebody who's not only an author like myself, but also a book coach like myself. So the conversation was deep and heavy into the psychology of the writer's mind. So today I spoke to Mary Adkins. Mary Adkins is a novelist. She has 3 novels out. Her most recent one is Palm Beach. And in addition to that, as I mentioned, she's a book coach as well. And she's using her past experiences, going through kind of the struggles of learning how to be a writer to help coach and counsel her clients. So like I said, this talk is real deep on a little bit on technique and how we write, but also about just the writer's mindset. So she actually went to law school. She was she was um, she was inspired as an early kid by a teacher to pursue her writing dreams. Got to college, took a creative writing course, and was discouraged by one teacher, and that's all it really takes at that age. And then she pursued law school, and then immediately gave that up, pretty much her second day in her job in corporate law, and decided to go back and pursue writing. And it's like what I've said before, and through all these interviews, you evidence that if somebody if somebody is going to be a writer, if somebody has that talent and that passion and that drive to be a writer within them, it will come out at some point, whether they like it or not. If they were meant to be a writer, it's going to come out. And I think Mary was fortunate in that she was able to see that in herself, as opposed to me, who had no aspirations for being a writer, and started writing in my early 30s. I think in my case, what was helpful is that I knew enough to pay attention and to be curious about what I was doing, about the act of writing, and that let me pursue it. But I didn't have any idea of pursuing it until I actually started doing it. So we really talk a lot about coaching. So if you are a listener out there who is interested in getting some motivation, getting some momentum with your writing journey, this might be an interesting conversation for you. I certainly loved it. Mary's great. We seem to click and have a lot in common. This is my conversation with Mary Adkins.
Left there when I was 18, and this is the first time I've really lived in the South since then. So
Got it. Got it.
was
Yeah,
away
I
a
was the
very
same
long
way.
time.
When I was 18 and headed off to college, I never
Came back.
came back home. Yeah, I lived everywhere else but home. So
Where were you living then by that
uh,
point?
I grew up in LA.
In
Um,
LA. Oh, okay.
yeah, but I went to New York for college and then just have lived everywhere. But I've been in Boulder, Colorado for the last just 28 years now. So
Oh, wow. Long time. Yeah, I knew you were
yeah,
in Colorado now. I didn't know it had
yeah,
been that long.
yeah, it's nice. I've learned that there's a nice, as it is in most places, but you have to look for it, a nice writers community. Um, you get to know people over time, and you realize like, oh, it's a
Good.
pretty robust community here. But it's not obvious until you're involved in organizations and critique groups and all that kind of stuff. But it's
Yeah,
it's it's pretty strong. Did you
that's great.
so growing up in South Carolina, did you have a sense of, hey, I want to do something creative with my life? Most people, it's funny talking to a lot of writers because, so many people as kids, at least when they recognize, because I think most kids in general want to do something exciting and fun and creative and different. No kid is saying, I can't wait to be a tax accountant. Um,
Right.
but but you also have the benefit of the absolute naivete about what it actually means to pursue something in the creative arts. But some kids, like by the time they're graduating high school, they're like, I absolutely know what I'm going to study in college. I want to go into creative writing or whatever. Where did you fall on that spectrum?
Yeah, I was in that camp. And the reason I actually remember very clearly when I decided I wanted to be a writer, because I was like a kid who like I was in elementary school and stuff. I was not like an honors kid.
Mhm.
I was either in like the average track or the below average track. Like I
Mhm.
was just sort of, I don't know, that's where they put me. And
Right.
so like I had never really gotten affirmation for anything in particular academically. And then in seventh grade, I was in this literature class where we had to write poems. We learned all the different kinds of poems, like what's a sonnet, what's a haiku, and we had to write them. And I loved it. But again, I didn't think I was any good at it. I just like liked doing it a lot. And
Right.
one day my seventh grade teacher, Miss Chansey, who to this day is like the best teacher I ever had for other reasons as well, but she was like giving a lecture to the class. She's like, anyone can learn how to write. Writing is a skill. Like anyone can learn how to do it. Now, she goes, now some people are just naturally good at it, like Mary. And
Oh,
I was sitting there, I'm like, what? I'm good at something and had
wow.
gotten singled out for like it was just it blew my like it never I remember just being so shocked. Like,
Right.
wait. I'm actually good at this because I did not it didn't even occur to me that I was that good at it. I knew I really liked doing it. Um but that was like a I don't know, that just like little taste of affirmation. And it happened, of course, it was also something I love doing. Like, but that combination really made me excited about it. And from then I'm like, I'm gonna be a writer, I'm gonna be a writer.
Huh. Well, and it's so interesting. And I hope teachers appreciate this. And I think they probably do if they've been doing it long enough, that it's not a throwaway comment, but just a sidebar comment really helped shape your destiny. It's so wild
Yeah.
because I've heard this several times in this podcast when we're talking to writers about kind of their influences. It's always middle school, maybe ninth grade,
Mm,
if there is a school related influence, and they can absolutely name the teacher's first and last names. Some of them are still in touch with that teacher, and it might be something as minor as that comment of like Mary. And then you're
mhm.
like, all right, I guess this is my life trajectory. But you
Yeah.
needed that because you weren't, like you said, you weren't getting that affirmation in other areas. And so he's kind of that floodgate opening of like, I'm good at something and somebody's telling me I'm good is
Yeah.
yeah, and it's so important.
So important. And then I actually had the opposite experience in college. So then I got to college and I still thought I'm going to be a writer. And I signed up for a creative writing class, a fiction writing class, the short story. Uh, and it was awful. It was, I didn't, I wrote, I don't even remember what it was, but the first thing I ever turned in, I got a B minus on. And I didn't, and this was like at a school with major grade inflation. So like no one got a B minus. I mean, that was
Hmm,
basically a D. It was basically a D, you know?
interesting. Uh-huh.
And I couldn't for the life of me figure out what to write to please this instructor. Like I just kept
Mhm.
trying different, I tried different styles and I was just hungry for the A. Like I just wanted that affirmation. And when I didn't get it the whole semester, I thought, I guess I guess I can't write fiction. I'm just not a fiction writer. And
Right.
I didn't take another creative writing class in all of college. And I majored in
Hmm.
public policy and went to law school. So there you go.
That's so
Like
interesting. Yeah.
it was literally the opposite experience. It was like, oh, okay, I guess I'm not as good at this, so I'll pivot.
But and you know this, and I want to get into it a little bit later on, being a book coach, like I am as well, that you look back and you say, I can coach because I have realized that, or I should say, this is all from my perspective. The very first thing I tell a client is there's a million ways to write your book. Don't ever listen to somebody that said it has to be done like this, because that's just not true. And it's evidenced in bookshelves around the world. Stories can take all sorts of form. You have to find, I can show you how I do it, and we can talk about how other people do it and what's been effective. But you ultimately have to find what works for you. And the only way that that happens is to sit down and write and go through that process of discovery for yourself. And that's
Yeah.
where so many people get hung up, is the actual physical act of sitting down and writing. And that's the
Yeah.
number one thing I coach, is like, write every single day. And I don't care if it's for 15 minutes, but like like your teacher said, anyone can do this. It's like anyone can grow muscles, but they've got to work out all the time. They've got to commit
Yeah.
to it. And that's what writing is, a muscle. Now, I do believe that there are differing levels of talent within people. Um, but even if you're somebody who maybe doesn't have a lot of natural talent for writing, you can become a competent writer by applying yourself.
Yeah.
You know, I can't draw for shit, but I could teach myself to draw to a minimal level of competency that would look better than average if I put a lot of time and effort into it.
Yeah.
Um, so,
Yeah.
so you went to
I
law school.
Yes, so I went to law school,
Where did you go to law
and
school? My daughter's starting to apply, so I'm curious.
I went to Yale, and I loved it. I loved law school at Yale.
I won't tell
I
that to my daughter. Actually, my daughter edits these, so she's going to be annoyed, because she's like, God damn it, they have a 173 average LSAT, and that's a really hard thing to do. So anyway,
Yeah,
hi
but you
Ellie.
can get
Look,
in
we're
without that
talking about
LSAT.
you.
Yeah, they
What's
they
that?
still let it in a range. They still let it in a range of LSAT. Once I was there, I met a lot of people. I'm like, oh, good, you got like, they have something else. Their LSAT score may be lower, but they have something else to,
Right,
get.
right,
But
right.
anyway, neither here nor there. I loved law school. I love because I really love. I find the law fascinating, and like now looking back, I remember one day it occurred to me, like, of course I find the law fascinating. It's all like law school was all stories. Like cases are stories. They start with a story. It's like
Right. Their stories and
the
problem solving. Yeah.
yeah, the opinion starts with Jane so and so was 33 years old and living in South Dakota. I mean, it's just reading stories and problems that people are having that they can't resolve on their own, which make them really interesting, like gritty problems to read about.
Right. Right.
So loved it. I loved law school. And it distracted me for a bit too, because it is like essentially storytelling and I'm reading and learning. I then it made sense. I had massive student loans after law school. I became a lawyer, and becoming a lawyer was the kick in the butt I needed to realize I did not want to. I did not need to be in law. I wanted to be writing, because I felt on my first day, literally my first day, I was standing in my law office, and I had just gotten my first assignment, and it was like I woke up and realized I was in a play. It was like I was in the Truman Show. It was like
Yeah. Right. Everyone's
I
watching
just
you. You feel like a fraud.
yeah, I'm like I landed in someone else's life. I don't know
Right.
whose life this is, but it's not mine. Like
Was this corporate law?
it was yes, it was
Yeah.
corporate law, and it was like I gotta get out. Like I gotta get out ASAP. Like the
Right.
second day I started looking for a different job, like a
Oh my God.
non-legal job, completely different job. And and my, of course, friends and family were concerned, because it was such a dramatic pivot to be like, they're like, you just started your job. I'm like, I don't want to be in law at all. I'll go work at Starbucks. And I remember my dad at one point just being like, please don't quit until you have some kind of income somewhere else.
Right. Right.
Like,
Starbucks
just
isn't going to pay
do
off
that.
$300,000 in student
Yeah,
loans.
exactly. So it took me 7 months to find a tutoring job that paid me a big enough hourly, tutoring the LSAT actually paid me a big enough
Mm,
hourly wage that I could tutor for like 4 or 5 hours a day at night and cover my bills as long as I moved to a different borough.
mm,
And then I could
mhm.
write during the day. And my income was low enough that I would qualify for like loan repayment assistance. So I like made all that work and left law and like haven't really, I mean, I haven't looked back. after it then was not like, oh, and then my writing career just took off. I mean, it took another 6 years before I had written a good enough book that anyone wanted to read it.
Right,
But
and the reality of it is, and maybe some of the listeners don't realize this, is, you how many people do you run into that like, "Oh, you've written a novel, so this is what you do now," and they don't realize, like, this is not the equivalent of working in corporate law income-wise. It is vastly different. It's massively unpredictable. If there's any success, if you make a single dollar, that dollar's not guaranteed the next year.
yeah,
It's a really high risk thing to do. So some people, in addition to writing, branch out and do coaching, retreats, that kind of stuff, which is what I've recently gotten into myself. And which is also a lot of work, but it's obviously fulfilling because it's related to
yeah.
the thing that we like to do anyway.
Yeah, we love doing it, and I assume you also love working with like, you and I love working with writers.
Love
And
it.
then you see even people who, what's her name? Frida McFadden, like,
Yeah.
there are really, really successful authors who maintain their careers in other fields. Like, they
Right.
stay doctors or they stay lawyers because even a book that does really well, like you said, it's a lot more it has a lot more in common with a job like being an actor, which is what my husband was when I met him, where
Hmm.
even if you're a successful actor, you're only as you're your income is only as good as your next gig. Like,
Right.
he and his
Right.
friends they would have Broadway gigs, which looks like the dream. Like, that's lit, or it is the dream in a way. That's stardom.
Right.
But then the show closes and you don't have a job.
Right. That's why so many the cliche of actors, as waiters is absolutely true because
Yeah.
I mean, it's the same thing with writers, and it's even riskier for writers because if you're writing fiction, unless you're on a multiple book contract, which is really hard to get these days, you're writing on spec and you're spending a year, however long you're spending, writing this book that may not sell at all.
Yeah.
So, what are you doing to gain income during that time? So, I mean, I could count on probably one hand the number of people I know, and I know a lot of writers who make enough money to be the sole breadwinner of their
Hmm.
family. It's,
Yeah.
most people I know who are writing full time have a partner,
Something
another source
else.
of income. It's really, and it's funny. I just had dinner with my agent last week at Thriller Fest in New York, and she's like, "It has gotten so much harder. It was
Hmm.
always hard, but it's
Yeah.
gotten even so much harder." She just talks. She's like, "I've stopped taking submissions. I'm just kind of like because it's just." She's getting a little bit older and stuff too, but it's a brutal, brutal industry. So you only do it because there's that passion.
Yeah. Well, exactly. And the 6 years that I was like writing and rewriting and rewriting and rewriting this one book and living paycheck to paycheck and um stressing about money and health insurance constantly, I was so much happier than I was as a well-paid lawyer. I was so much happier.
Totally,
Like,
totally.
I would wake up and have that moment where for a second I would be like, because I would think that I was maybe still gonna have to go to the law office, and then I would remember that I had quit that job. It would be like, oh, it would be like angel singing.
Yeah,
It's just, it's
totally.
like, oh, I don't care that I'm poor. Like, I get to write today.
Right,
Like,
right.
I'm
Totally.
I'm good. And like, sure, it's not like it's all, butterflies and rainbows, but
No,
um
but I
yeah.
mean, and I'll talk about this a little bit. It's not something I talk a lot about, but so I went to hotel school at Cornell, and so I was in the hospitality industry for decades,
Mm,
consulting,
mhm,
and up until early last year, I ran the consulting group for this large firm. Now, this large firm got acquired by this multinational firm who consulting just wasn't their thing. And
mhm,
so they got rid of the entire consulting division. So here I am, an executive making a high salary and who's figured out over 20 years how to write books at the same time by doing it an hour a
mhm.
day and suddenly out of work. And because and I bring this up because your comments really ring true with me. And an easy thing to do, not super easy, but an easy thing to do for me would be to get another position somewhere. I'm well known in the industry. And after a few months, I'm like, I I don't want that, and so not only did I launch my own consulting company with an ex-partner of mine who we work together. Now we're working together now, which is really hard to do. I launched my own writing company in addition to writing books. So the point being is I'm working harder now than I ever have, making less than I ever have, and I'm happier than I've ever been
Yeah.
because I'm creating and I'm so excited. I'm still only writing an hour a day, but my days are now full with creating other things for something that's my vision and nobody
Yeah.
else's vision. And you're right, it's so rewarding. I mean, I'm not saying it's without stress, and I'm very happy that I've saved money. And maybe it's easier to do in your 20s when you're a little bit more just naturally carefree as a human anyway. Um,
Yeah.
but this idea that kids coming out of college, they have to know what they want to do, and it's bullshit to me. Um,
Yeah.
because how I didn't start writing until I was 33 and I had no interest or
Wow.
aspirate. It just literally happened one day and like out of the blue. So it took
Like
me,
you had a story idea, like a book
I,
idea? Like what
I
happened?
gave myself a riddle because I was in the middle of an 8 hour long continuing education class and it was just something to pass the time. And I couldn't solve my own riddle. So I started writing a story and I had this 400-page manuscript in 90 days. And so it took me to like pay
Wow.
attention, be like, why did this happen? Is this important? Is
That's
this what I'm
cool.
supposed to do? And I knew the story was not great. I was actually very lucky to get an agent with it, but that book never sold. Neither did the two after that. So
Mm.
it's just a lot of learning, and now I've got 10 books sold. But it takes you being curious and really paying attention to things that happen in your life, and to not dismiss it and be like, is this important? What is the meaning of this?
Yeah. Yeah, and I think I love like you saying writing an hour a day was how you I mean, that's how you effectively launched your career, right? Because you were
Yep.
working, you had your
Yeah.
full-time job. And I didn't have that so this whole time that I'm rewriting the book, like you said, in my carefree 20, I mean, this is why I think I had the, cojones to quit my job. Like I was 27. I was responsible for no one except myself.
Right.
And I don't know, I had that kind of, I was like an unguided missile. I'm like 27, I have nothing to lose.
Right.
So and then those 6 years that I was writing and rewriting, I would tutor at night, but I had all day, every day. I had endless hours to write.
Right.
And so when I sold so then my novel sells, work on it for a couple, 2 year basically timeline until it came out. By the time it came out, I had had a baby. And in the
Mm,
meantime had some point got married, had just had a baby.
right.
And I had just sold my second novel on a proposal, which is, if people don't know, that's something you can sometimes do after you've sold a first book. Can't do it first if it's not, but sometimes you
Right.
can do it on
Unless it's
proposal, which is
nonfiction. Right. Yeah.
yeah, if it's fiction. But then it was this thing where I was like, now I have to write a book under extremely different conditions than I did the last time. Like
Right.
first of all, I had taken a full-time job so we could have health insurance so we could have a baby. So I had a full-time job. I had a maternity leave, but I had a maternity leave with a full-time job and a newborn and a book contract. And it was like I don't know how to write a book under these conditions.
Right.
And it was very daunting. Like it was the first time I had ever had the thing I had heard where you sit down at the computer and you look at the blinking cursor and you feel
Right.
paralyzed. I'd
Right.
never had that, but then I did. It was like there's nothing. I have no words. And so what I ended up doing was handwriting, and that's when I handwriting is the thing that unlocked it for me that time because
Wow.
when I
That's my worst nightmare, by the way.
really
Oh, my hand cramps at writing a grocery list.
I mean, this was out of necessity because of the whatever you want to call it, paralysis or writer's block. But what I could do in handwriting was convince myself that I was just journaling. So I would or doing kind of Julia Cameron's morning pages. So I would start writing and like, oh, I didn't get any sleep last night because the baby woke up all night and I don't have anything to say about this novel. And I don't even really feel like I know these characters anymore. And then it would slowly drift into an idea. And then suddenly I would be writing a scene and
Right.
I would just it was almost just like you're trying to not wake up a sleeping animal or something,
Right.
but the animal was my brain. I'm like
Right.
sneaking around my brain to actually write the book. And then would it just extract the scenes from this thing that was basically my diary. Anyway, it was kind of,
Well, you're
it was
right.
very
Yeah.
roundabout.
But it's a shift of perspective. And I mean, I love talking about the psychology of writing. I'm really fascinated with it. And I teach about it a lot. And I think if you see somebody, say in your situation, who I haven't been in this situation before where I have to write a novel under these circumstances, and I'm sitting down and I have a blinking cursor, you can usually trace that back and say, okay, it's not about your story. There's something, there's something else going on that's giving you this block. It has nothing, it's probably
Mm,
the stress of like, how am I
mm,
going to do this? Is not letting you get past it. But you can
mhm,
usually start breaking down like, well, okay, what is different this time? And you find a solution that kind of lubricates your brain enough to kick it back into gear into because if you sit down and just kind of really almost meditate on your book where you're fully present in the moment, um, ideas will come within 5 minutes.
mhm.
Doesn't mean they're great ideas, but you will be transported into a world of fiction in your mind very quickly. But all that other stuff, if you can't block that out, it will just eat you alive. And I think where people really suffer, and one of the first things I do with all my clients is we do an exercise where we really go through why they're writing. Because the people who don't have a good why that they're doing it, except for
Mm,
I like the idea of being a writer or whatever, maybe they're so misguided they think they're going to make millions of dollars, they're not going to have that passion there to actually suffer through and figure out how to get through the other side of what you went through. Um,
yeah.
because they but they haven't really allowed themselves to face that fact. They're just like, they think they're doing everything right, but their why isn't solid enough to propel them through what's a very, very difficult thing to do. To write a book is really hard. It gets easier, but it's never easy.
That rings so true to me. And now that you put it that way, I think it's very obvious to me that in that moment that I felt just paralyzed, I didn't have a why that was good enough because the thing I cared most about was like the little baby in the other room and
Of
keeping him
course.
alive. And
Yes.
so I just didn't, and having a book contract isn't real motivation. That's just an external, like, it
Right.
was an obligation, but that's not what lights a fire in you, right?
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Totally. Yeah. And and I truly think if you are at heart a writer, um, at some point you sit down and it's not work. And this sounds terribly cliched, but it's true. Like, so that hour a day is one of my favorite parts of the day because, and
Hmm.
I don't outline. So I'm like, I wonder what
Me
happens
neither.
next. And isn't that exciting? To me, it's just like
Yeah.
I might have a loose idea of the next few scenes or just a sense of like some kind
Same.
of conflict has to
Yeah.
happen soon. Um,
Yeah.
but I don't know. And then you write a certain sentence and that gives you a whole like, oh my God, what if this? Like the whole what if as I'm writing is so interesting to me because you think of things
Same.
on the fly. What if this dude just died right now? What would that look like? I don't know. Let's write
Yeah.
him getting killed and maybe we keep it, maybe we don't, but maybe it would be interesting to see. To me, that's like one of my favorite parts of the day. So it doesn't feel, but there are
Yeah.
other days, as you know, especially as a coach, that writing feels like data entry. Writing feels like a chore, but those are the times when you really need to do it the most because that's how
Hmm.
you're training that muscle. And the people who wait for the muse and then they go on a crazy 8-hour writing binge, but then they don't do it for another month. They never finish anything because
Hmm.
they're waiting to, you don't do that with your regular job. I'm not feeling it today, boss.
Yeah.
I don't, so
Yeah. Yeah.
you have to treat it like a job because even if you're not making any money, if you've committed to it, it's a job.
Yeah. I love that. And I think for me, sometimes when it starts to feel like a chore, I have found that the solution is often in the story itself.
Mhm.
Like, it's because, like, something needs to happen, or like I need to shake things up. Like
Right.
and I don't outline either. And sometimes it'll be because I have done a little bit of like, so I've like outlined a little bit far ahead this time. And now I feel like I'm just sort of filling in blanks. And
Mhm.
so it's starting to like writing has stopped being inspiring because I'm just, I've decided this can happen, this can happen, this can happen. So now I'm just writing those as sentences when really what I need to do is just like let it be alive and let myself be surprised by like the sentence that comes out of my fingers, because I mean that's my favorite part is when it's like I
Right.
did like this character's doing what they're thinking what,
Right.
like
You have to trust your subconscious that it
yeah,
is working
yeah.
behind the scenes. The one time I tried to outline, it was one of my early books, and I remember I outlined maybe, I don't know, even the first 30% of it. And so I'm like, this is going to be easy. And I'm writing the very first scene is a guy and he's driving to work on the Washington, D.C. Beltway. And he's a little cynical. It's from his point of view. And I'm thinking, like, even as I'm writing, I'm thinking, like, I don't know. People are going to be turned off by this guy a little bit, I think, the way that I'm writing. So I need something to happen that shows he's a good guy. So there's an accident. So he goes out to help. Um,
Hmm.
and then I think like he's got to get hit by a car because he's standing in the beltway. And I'm like, there's no way he can't not get hit by a car. So that wasn't in the outline. And I have him get hit by a car. And then that totally changes the entire course of the book. So within the first
Mm,
chapter, I went off course and I'm like, this is just not how I write. It's the
yeah.
discovery to me is in those moments of you're just like, oh my, because then if you have a twist, you didn't see it until that moment.
Yes.
And then
Yes,
nobody
I
else
always
is
say
going to
the
see it.
same thing.
And
Exactly.
that's your
It's the best
subconscious
way to
working.
write a twist because
Right.
if you are surprised, the reader's definitely going to be surprised. Like you don't have to
Right.
fake it. Yeah.
Right. Totally. And
Yeah.
that's all your subconscious working because you've thought about it enough and then you've kind of mentally thrown it away and it's just out there floating. And I
Yeah.
mean, that is so immensely rewarding to me. And that's one of the reasons I do it. Is just like, I want to have those moments. I want to live those moments of like discovery because there's nothing like it.
Same. It's such a great feeling.
Why did you get into coaching? What was that kind of impetus?
Um, I so I did that writing class in college, didn't write fiction again for almost a decade. Um, and then when I decided I wanted to write a novel, I started taking writing classes. So by this time I've quit my law job and I'm tutoring at night and I'm writing during the day and I'm signing up for classes. And these series of classes that I took over these years were so bad. And I don't like, I don't mean to, I don't know, I hate to be like negative or just like, crap all over other people's way of doing things, but I would just leave, they would be like peer feedback based. So, there'd
Right.
be 14 of us in the class, and then you submit pages, and then everyone tears apart those pages
Right.
and then just gives you a ton of criticism that doesn't seem to be based on anything because they also have never written a book before. Like, no
Right.
one actually knows how to write the book. That's why we're in the class. And then I guess I was like, oh, then I guess I'm supposed to stop writing now. Like I've written first pages of a new draft, but now I'm supposed to not keep going and incorporate all of this feedback into these 10 pages.
Right.
Like, and that was just every single class that I took until at some point and actually I remember now I remember what it was. It was in another one of these classes. And by this point, I had like managed to eke out several versions of this novel over and over and over again, based on peer feedback, instructor feedback. And I was in yet another class. And I remember opening my critique from the instructor in the class. And she was critiquing my something. And she's like, well, this is how you should do it. And then she started writing my book. It
Oh,
was like,
which is
it
the
was
worst thing
like
you could do.
which is the worst thing. It was like, here's how I would do it. And then it was like two paragraphs of her writing my book. And there was something in that moment I was like, what is happening? Like I don't even know what my idea is anymore, because I'm like I'm like letting everyone else influence what this thing is.
Right.
And it's not fun. It's totally, it had totally lost its fun.
And it's lost your
And
vision.
it's totally, yes, and it had totally lost my vision. It was like, what, like reading her thing, it was that thing where I was like, I don't know exactly where I want this novel to go right now, but I know it's not that. Like
Right.
what you're doing right there is not my vision.
Right.
So I I had this epiphany at one point, right around the same time. I was also in a writing group. So it's like I'm in these classes and I'm submitting the draft to the writing group. And at some point when I had submitted stuff to the writing group, someone had said, the parts where your characters are just emailing back and forth are so good. They're the best part. They're so funny. And like,
Hmm.
I just love reading all the emails. And at some point I had this, I'm like, what if I wrote the entire book in emails? I'm like,
Right.
what if I gave myself that challenge? And that sounded fun. And like, it sounded super fun. It just sounded like, I don't know if that's going to be good, but that sounds like the kind of thing I would do, whether it's going to be good or not, because that's just like
Right.
an interesting
Which is the
exercise.
best kind of writing, is to write for yourself.
Yeah, yeah. And it felt very serendipitous that soon after I made that choice, it was one of those things where like, it just feels like it's all kismet and it's coming together. Someone emailed me and said, hey, there's this writing residency that's coming up in Martha's Vineyard in a couple of weeks.
Hmm.
And this girl just had to drop out. And now there's just a spot and someone needs to take her room and we can't find anyone to take her room. Do you want to just go to this writing residency? And I'm like, yep, sign me up. Like, I'll figure out a way to get there. And that's what I did. So I went to that writing residency. My goal going there was like, I'm going to rewrite this draft. And this time I'm only using emails, nothing but emails. And just forgot all of the criticism from all of the classes and everything. Um, and that was it. I mean, that was the draft that became my first novel, and that it grew from there. But like the heart of it was that I wrote at that residency very quickly. I wrote it in like 2 weeks. It was
Right.
super fast. Yeah.
Right. And you learn that to write, right. Be true to yourself, because the problem with classes or critique groups, and I think both can be great, is you have to, like, you have 14 opinions, and now the impetus is on you to figure out which of these people do I listen to? Because if you made
Yes.
changes from 14 people, your thing would be a nightmare. It would be
A
terrible,
nightmare.
because
Yeah.
they say opposite things often. I mean, I find with coaching, like it's I'm fascinated by writers who, I think there's a group of writers who are like, there's a segment of the population that just wants to continuously learn. They're fascinated with the prospect of learning, but they're kind of shielding the fact that they don't really want to do it. Um,
Mm.
and I've seen it a lot where and there's nothing wrong with that if they want to just, but that goes back to your why. Why are you doing this? If you just want to keep learning, that's awesome, but just know what your perspective is. Um, I like to coach people who are like just truly like, I really want this to be my life, but I'm struggling with, again, the psychology of it or the logistics of it, or because I don't think there's anything to substitute for the fact that you just have to do it over and over and over again until you finally find a groove, your voice, whatever you want to call it. It's not going to be something you're just going to learn on day one and be able to apply.
Yeah.
But going through that process, I mean, people are scared of failure. They're scared of success. They're scared of what people they're scared of sharing, which is one of the most horrifying. They're scared of rejection. And all of that's 100% valid. And if you can coach
Yeah.
people to not only to accept like rejection, but to embrace it and learn from it and see it as a tool, it opens up doors for me. So I love talking about stuff like that, because everyone's got their own journey. And if you sit there and say, this is how you do it, you're kind of robbing them, I think,
Yeah.
of their own like instincts. And that's, the best writers are true to themselves, I think.
Me too. I completely agree. I feel like you and I are very similar in our philosophy of coaching, because that's what the reason I told that long story is because once I finally figured out I cracked this nut, and the nut being like, I have to trust my own vision over everybody else's opinion. Like I just that I can't give that away. Once that's gone, I don't have anything anymore.
Right.
Like
Right.
I can't write books by committee. I don't want to do that. It's not fun. Even if the books were better, I wouldn't want to do it because it's not fun. So,
Right.
I
All
mean
of that
that's
feedback has to be trust.
yeah. And once I figured that out, I thought, oh, I think I can like I feel like I've been through the trenches now and I can really help people in the same boat, like
Right.
not be, even if they are taking those kinds of writing classes, like I can help them not be derailed by them in the way that I was. Because it's very easy to be derailed by that, of course, because we're novices and we can recognize that we're novices. And so we want to learn. So you're like, oh, I'm very open. I prided myself on being open to feedback.
Right.
But there's a balance to strike there.
It is. And I think it takes kind of a naturally empathetic person to kind of deal with that because, not only are we novices, but we're also massively insecure around our writing. And
Yeah.
on top of that, you're doing something that is highly by nature personal.
Hmm.
So when you submit yourself to criticism with all those combination of factors, one it just takes one that can crush your soul. And you
Yeah.
can't let it do that. But I get it. I get because the formulas are all there for you to be. I mean, I didn't I didn't literally say the words, "I'm a writer," out loud until my 3rd book was published and hit the USA Today bestsellers list because I was embarrassed by it. I was like, I felt like a hobby. I was ashamed. I'm like, yeah, I write these stupid little things.
Wow.
And so I like want to teach people like find the confidence, tell people you're a
Wow.
writer, even though if it makes you uncomfortable. If you have 2 jobs and you're at a cocktail party and they ask you what you do, say that one first. And it's really
Yeah.
scary and really hard for people to do, and it was impossible for me. So I get it, but it's so much of it is psychological barriers. Um, and
Yeah.
but yeah, it makes sense. So, um,
And I think that's what you're describing is so common. I feel like it's also so common that sometimes when I do it, I get met with even a little bit of disbelief. Like,
right,
oh, I'm a novelist. You're like, wait, actually?
right. Totally. Well, because no one ever meets
What?
novelists, so it's and how many times do you tell people that people even that you maybe know or know a little bit, and they immediately say like, "Oh, I've always wanted to do that," or "I started a book once," or whatever.
Yes.
So many people do it,
All the time.
and then I'm
Yes.
always like, "Well, why haven't you?" Like, "Why? Oh, I just don't have the time." Well, that's bullshit. I didn't have time
Yeah.
either. Time is
Yeah.
time means nothing. You will find time. Did you watch Netflix for an hour tonight?
Yeah, exactly.
Is that more
Yeah.
important to you than right? Like you can make it work. So it's amazing. A lot of people want to do it, but few people actually sit down and apply themselves because it's so easy to look at it as like a hobby and silly thing. And I wish I had a different attitude when I started, but I was so because I had no background, I was so insecure,
Hmm.
and I didn't understand anything, um, and being self-taught. But I wish I had more confidence back then. But it's really tough to do.
Yeah. It's also that kind of thing where when you say that to people, like if even now, because I'm kind of putting off starting this new book and hearing you say like the truth, which is time is not the problem, it you're kind of like, ah, shit.
I know,
Right? Because you're
I
like,
know,
that means it's just on me. It's just
yeah.
on me. Right? Like,
I
yeah.
know. It all depends because I just finished something last week and I can't wait to sit down and write something new because I kind of have a general idea. I can see this person. But if I didn't have that, I would be finding excuses. Be like, "Oh, I just wrote a book. I'm going to take a few weeks off." But now I'm like, I
Yeah.
can't wait to dive in because I want to see what this person's deal is because they're really weird. So
That's
it's
ideal. I love that feeling.
I know it doesn't happen all the time. Well, Mary, we're going to wrap up. Before we do, we are going to do the storytelling part of this,
Let's
the
do
making
it.
it up part. I've picked 3 books, mostly at random from my bookshelves. I'm going to have you choose one of those volumes. We're going to pick a random page and a random sentence. So what happens is I'm going to read that sentence, and then that's going to be the first sentence and maybe a 2 to 3 minute long short story. I will read that sentence, and then you give me the next sentence or two. Then I'll do a sentence or two, and when it completely goes off the rails, I will call it a day.
Great.
So I have Lost Lake by my good friend Emily, Littlejohn, mystery writer. Actually, I have an anthology of horror stories, Nightmares Unhinged, and R.H. Herron's thriller, Stolen Things. So choose one of those.
Let's do Lost Lake.
Lost Lake. Emily's awesome. She's here in Denver. Give me
Cool.
a page between 1 and 300.
88.
Okay, I'm going to quickly scan it. Let's see. All right. This is going to be very basic. So you do whatever you want with this. He was dead wrong.
He was dead wrong. She hadn't chosen the Honeycrisp apples at the grocery store because she knew that he hated them.
Sometimes she didn't think so much about what he wanted. Sometimes it would tickle her brain, the idea of thinking about things that she knew that he would absolutely hate. And she hated to admit herself that when that happened, it made her smile just a little bit.
But she wasn't about to reveal that to him. And so she insisted that she loved Honeycrisp apples, that in fact she always had loved them, and that he had probably just not been paying attention, just like he had not noticed that lately something had been very different in their home.
Of course, the fantasy took flight several times a day. And sometimes she would think about it for a full hour if she were true to herself. That fantasy of what would it be like if he weren't here? She stared at him as he bit into the apple. And in the deep recesses of her mind, she thought back to all the stories as a kid on Halloween when somebody would always find a razor in their apple.
The thoughts were relentless and would enter her mind at random times throughout the day. What if he weren't here? Followed by a vision of a scene in which that could actually happen. She would immediately be ridden with guilt over these brief fantasies, but it didn't stop them from coming. It never did.
Oh, that's a good place to end it. I like that. I,
We went Breaking Bad. We're
Yeah,
writing a villain.
it usually gets a little dark on this show. There's usually some
Mm.
kind of body to be found somewhere. But I like when it just feels organic. Like, yeah, this is a relationship, and where's this going? And you can kind of let it breathe, or you can be like, no, she's going to kill him.
Yeah.
Because let's admit it, we all know he's an asshole. He did something.
It's gonna happen. Yeah.
It's his fault. Well, Mary, I'm glad we finally got the chance to sit down and chat, and it just felt like we have a lot in common. So it's always fun when
Yeah.
I have those. I'm like, yeah, we're on the same wavelength. So I
Yeah,
love that,
same.
and
It was
I'm
great.
excited for your books and all your coaching, and I think you're proof that you could find a well-rounded career as a writer. You don't have to just lock yourself in a room with a typewriter and be an introvert. You can build a lifestyle around the act of fiction writing. And I'm just learning that myself, and I think it's very fulfilling.
Yeah. Great. Well, thanks so much, Carter.
So that's it. That is my conversation with Mary Adkins, and we We wove a nice little short, tight, potential murder mystery story right there at the end, which was a lot of fun. So Mary's fantastic. You can find out all you want to know about Mary, not only about her books, but her writing coaching services at maryadkinswriter.com. And if you are also interested in learning about my books, just go to carterwilson.com. If you're interested in my coaching or my retreats or my online classes, you can just go to my company's website, unboundwriter.com. So that's it for this week. More episodes will be out next week. In the meantime, folks, as always, I truly appreciate you watching and or listening to this. Share with friends, spread the word. I'd love to get as many people listening to this as possible because I think it's fun and I think it's a good podcast. So that's it, folks. Take care.